Okay, a little bit about me. I think half the people here I sort of know, but for those who don't know me, my name's Mark. In my 20s, I worked with designing and developing large, complex IT systems, industrial systems. So I'm pretty good with complex systems. In my 30s, sort of woke up, quote unquote, a bit cheesy, sort of a shaman, yoga, meditation vibe, like a lot of you here, and got out of the matrix. Since then, maybe the last 15 years, I've sort of been researching, been writing quite a few books on Amazon, making videos, about 100 videos sharing information, quite a few million views. Been an astrologer, studying astrology, about 15 years, about 300 professional clients. I had to actually close the office, it got too busy, and I've also created a few off-grid spaces. So cosmology, some of you are probably thinking, what is that? And we'll get into that. I was one of the first to expose some of this information 2014, and I output a lot of content up to around 2019, had about 4 million views. I got stopped in 3 countries by unmarked cars, and men with guns came out, and they were like, where are you going, Mark? So I know I was sharing information that certain people don't want to be shared. What I'm going to share today, you can't really find on Google or YouTube. You can find it on other sensorless platforms, decentralized platforms, but if you go online and just search for this stuff, you're going to find a big pile of nonsense. Today, I'm not really trying to persuade anyone anything. I'm just sharing information. I have no ego attached to how you receive it. Maybe 2015, I'd have been a bit more chopsy about it. But now I'm really not bothered how you receive it. It's just information. But sometimes I do one-on-ones with this. People are interested, they come to me, and people really enjoy this information. But I have no attachment to how you receive it. That's up to you, and that's your path, and you just take what you want and leave what you want. I've done these talks and people have walked out, people have insulted me. I've seen it all, so take it how you want to take it. The first 70, 75 minutes, it's hard to estimate. I'm going to look at mainstream cosmology and the issues with that, imagery, outer space, Antarctica, the sky, curvature, and then the second 40 minutes or so, I'm going to look at what's more rational cosmology, the wheres, the whys, the hows. Does it even matter? Why would it be any different? We're going to look at the ancients, we're going to look at the sky, and hopefully have time for questions if you're not too hungry. Someone else just arriving. Everyone's going to stare now. Person late. Hi. Okay, just find a seat anywhere. We haven't really started yet, so all good. Okay, so we're going to get into the first section, mainstream cosmology. Some of you are probably thinking, what is cosmology? Well, it's the macrocosm. Well, first off, we can say the microcosm is the human. It's the I'm having an experience, the I am, I will be, are very high concepts in Kabbalah and yoga. So when we say I am having an experience, is it the I, the false I? And we can get into some esoterica. We don't have time for that. But the macrocosm is the cosmology. Where am I? Where am I having the experience? Where is this experience being happened? Where is it happening? What is the container for this experience we're all having? And before we start, I just want you to sort of ask yourself, do you live within a series of beliefs, or knowing or not knowing? And real knowing comes through direct experience and real evidence, observable, measurable, repeatable. So all of us for sure live in beliefs, but how far do those beliefs go? And maybe it's better to be in just knowing. And that'll make more sense as we go. What I'm going to do, I'm going to present, I think it's like 8 or 9 jigsaw pieces, so it's sort of structured and makes more sense. And the first jigsaw piece, I want to look at images. Now, this is an image from, they say, the Hubble telescope up in outer space, and they say it views into all these galaxies with this super technology telescope. Now, we can all agree here, it's very simple, this is a belief. Okay, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but it's a belief, because no one in this room has been to the Hubble telescope, clicked the camera, and brought the photo back on a USB key. So this image is showed all around the world of these galaxies in the universe. None of us really know for sure that that's real. Again, we're told from our childhood we live revolving around the sun at the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, and this image is used a lot, also similar images. Even the mainstream will say that's a computer art image. Now, in that model, nothing can fly that far away, that's trillions of miles away, take a photo and send it back or bring it back. So that's actually agreed upon by everyone that that is just an image, an artist image. But that's where they say we are, the edge of the Milky Way in one of millions of suns. Then we can see from outer space there are many images of Earth. Okay, nothing weird here, many different images of Earth. Some have different contrast, some have different colours, a little bit weird, but nothing really to raise my interest. Many images of Earth. I think the one in the top right, the sea looks very blue, a little bit weird, but you know, nothing too crazy there. Maybe it's the way they filtered it or the camera. Many different images of Earth from space, no problem. Things get just a tiny bit weird when we see Australia many different colours. Again, not really a big problem. Then we can see the same image, but night and day, that's okay. But then we see the same clouds. And of course, you're giving me some belief that these are official images, so you'd probably have to do your own research and check that I'm using official images. Another image, a little bit weird. It looks like South America's not there. Maybe it's under the cloud. Again, just a little bit strange. And this one gets a bit stranger. The one on the left, again, NASA official images. America looks far too big. America and Canada, far too big. Yeah, maybe they made an error, human error. It's no big problem yet. Another one, this looks like this area of Earth takes up too much of the globe. Again, not a big problem yet. Canada looks underwater. And things start to get a little bit weird when people zoom in on these high-res images and start to see some of the clouds are copy and pasted. This is near Guatemala, a place I used to live. Many clouds copy and pasted. And of course, you probably need to do this yourself. Download the image, zoom in. It's quite a boring thing to do. We've all got better things to do. But a lot of the images have a lot of copy and paste. It's an image 2002, 2007. They've copy and pasted the clouds. They look a little bit different, but they've definitely done some copy and paste. And some people actually went to NASA with this. This is around 2014-15 when this sort of kicked off online. And they actually said, the guy who works for NASA in the image department, he said, it's all photoshopped because it has to be. And that's exactly what he said. You probably can't find this on YouTube anymore, but they actually admitted it. They're all photoshopped. In some articles, you can see that they said, oh, they made composites and photoshopped them together. But it's a bit weird that they photoshopped these images. I mean, surely with the space station and satellites, they could just take an image. Then we can look at other images we're fed, like the exploding image of Earth with all these different heat layers within, crust, mantle, core. And then when we look at the science, the deepest hole humans have ever dug is only 7.6 miles. This is in Russia, I believe. So just going 7.6 miles down, they're telling us what's down 3,000 miles. It doesn't really make much sense. So it's just a little first jigsaw piece just to get you started. The second jigsaw piece is quite big, and it's bigger than I would like. And I've thought about this many times, but it has to be big. The outer space jigsaw just has to be looked at, and it will make more sense later. In about 15 minutes, you'll probably be like, I'm not here to look at this stuff about space, I'm here for something interesting about cosmology, but this is a really key jigsaw. And I've shown hundreds of people this information, and this jigsaw piece is just super needed. Okay, 1969. They say they phoned up the moon on this phone. Nixon. Hello, operator, get me the moon right away. And the funny thing is, this is 238,000 miles away, and in 1969 they had no second delay. But in 2017, you know, the ISS just 250 miles away, it's like they always have a 5 or 10 second delay. Little bit weird. When they went to the moon, the astronauts before looked super happy. In the press conference when they got back, they looked really scared, and they're all scared to answer the questions. This is a very interesting jigsaw piece, worth watching. They're very scared to answer any of the questions. It looks like they've just been threatened, but of course, that's my subjective opinion. Also in NASA, in Hollywood, we can see NASA executives and Stanley Kubrick in the 1960s. I'm not drawing any conclusions, but that's a real photo. Now, just a few years ago, we said to NASA, why don't you keep going back to the moon? Why don't you keep going there, maybe set up a webcam? And they said they don't have the technology anymore. In fact, they actually said they lost the technology. And the technology wasn't really that smart. There we go. We went to the moon in 69, but we lost the technology. And we all know in our own lives, technology is progressing super quickly. And they can't replicate this technology, they said. They lost it. But this Apollo guidance system was only 64K, and in 1980, the Fisher-Price Speak and Spell had 4 times the power. Little bit strange. We also said in 69, this is the code she wrote for the guidance computer. Again, we're working on beliefs. None of us have read that. They also used this image to show how the guidance computer worked. Again, this just explains how a processor or a basic computer works. There's nothing about flying to space in this explanation. Also in 1969, they had these rockets that turned into this in the top right, and then back into this. Let's remind ourselves at this time in the 60s, no one had video recorders, and certainly not the internet, to examine and study what actually went on. This is Apollo 12 landing on the moon, but who took the photo? I think I have a little 10-second clip to show you. There's a few clips throughout the presentation.
Mission 99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Fire away, Houston. Vector good.
So that technology of something just going up without thrusters or anything, none of us have actually seen that on Earth. And if we look at these blue sparks...
99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
No, it doesn't look so great. And to this very day, they still say that's real. That's a real footage. Very crazy. And what I'd ask you is, who filmed it? Who filmed that? They filmed it, and they're like, hey, wait for me. So it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up at all. Then they say this thing flew off the moon and rejoined this thing, and they climbed into this thing, and then flew back to Earth. They also say they spent $38 trillion on this. I would say they got ripped off. They also say this camera was used on the moon. This is official. The official camera took 120 pictures in 30 minutes. The film wasn't radiated. The camera wasn't modified for the moon, and it was okay in minus 280 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you take your phones to that sort of climate, I can assure you your phone's going to start breaking. Then they say this thing lands 2,200 degrees Celsius, and I think they say it goes about 2,000 miles an hour coming into the atmosphere. No burns, no steam. For me, 2,000 miles an hour, that hot, the parachute will probably burn up. Maybe they're using clever technology. It's all a bit weird for me, but this is still spouted as real in 2021. This is China. Again, someone's been to the florist. It's a little bit weird to believe that. Now, things get a bit weird when people like me, I looked through 200 hours of spacewalks. I looked through days and days of this footage back in 2014. This astronaut has an office reflected in his visor. The Hubble telescope, if you download the official image, there's the link, and you play with the levels in Photoshop, and remember this image was created before Photoshop, you can start seeing someone's hands there. It looks like someone's hands. The space shuttle, one image, you can start playing with the levels and you see someone's head. Now, they spout this as a real image. They spout this as a real image to this very day, and there's the Earth. And the moon horizon looks a bit close for me. Another image, try not to look at the cardboard. It looks like cardboard on the spaceship. And there's the Earth in the background. Now the weird thing is, the Earth is supposed to be 6 times bigger than the moon, so it should look like this. So they've made a big error. That's a problem. They've got the Earth looking the same size from the moon as the moon does from Earth. It's a problem. That's it. That's a problem in anyone's book. Here's another spaceship, they say. Hi, Corey. And if you zoom in, for me, you're seeing foil and tape, and no one's explained to me what sort of high technology this is. Origami, cardboard space tent, maybe a bottle wrapped in foil in front of a poppadom. Maybe. What I'm trying to emphasize is we're working on beliefs, and some of these images look a bit dodgy. They said they'd have colonies on moon by 78, and of course none of that's happened. We're going to go through the space thing for about 10-15 minutes, and it'll make more sense later. They then brought out the space shuttle in 1981, and they said once the 3 booster rockets fell off, the engines on the space shuttle took it from 3,000 miles an hour to 17,000 miles an hour. Now, if you look at the aerodynamics of the space shuttle, and then the Blackbird, which is known as the fastest plane in the world, 2,000 miles an hour, it seems a bit strange to me that the space shuttle can go from 3,000 to 17,000 miles an hour with that sort of aerodynamics. They also say the re-entry speed is 16 to 17,000 miles an hour, and the guys in there are wearing sort of sleeping bag fashion and not getting hot. And they also say the space shuttle does this beautiful flip before it re-enters. You won't find any footage of a space shuttle re-entry online or on the NASA website. Interesting. The space shuttle was said to be 82 tons when empty, but was cruising around on the back of a 747 NASA plane. But if you go to the airport and your baggage is over 25 kilograms, they're going to say it's a bit too heavy to get on the flight. Bit weird. Now, from my research, and we don't have the time to go into the space shuttle too much, this is a lightweight glider. What they said with the space shuttle, they needed this sort of narrative because in 1990 it launched the Hubble telescope, and there seems to be far too much curvature on that image in the top right. And they said in 1998 it started to launch the International Space Station at 17,000 miles an hour. That got it into orbit. And interesting for me, I've said a few times, is the space shuttle was decommissioned in 2011. Why would you decommission a piece of engineering that can go to space? It's like you have a car in your front garden that can take you to work, and one day you're like, oh, I'm just going to decommission it. You would repair it, or you would create a similar model that's improved. For me, the space shuttle in 2011 decommissioning was because the internet was in everyone's house around 2011, 2012, and certain people were starting to look into this stuff, and the space shuttle was just really, for me, a pile of garbage. Well, we could at least say it's beliefs. This is proof of one of the Hubble service missions. So they say they fixed the telescope, they improved the telescope 4 times at 17,000 miles an hour, 340 miles away, and the space shuttle met with it. Again, that's just an image. That's not enough for us to have knowing. I don't want you to understand this image or worry about it too much, but what I want to explain is the Hubble telescope is the reason they tell us the universe is expanding. They call this the Hubble constant. They say the Hubble telescope is so intelligent and so technically superior that it can find out these things that none of us can. And they make a big statement like, for every 19 trillion miles, the universe expands 73 kilometers per second. Expanding into what? They don't say. Can you show us the instrumentation? No, they can't. Just a lot of clever images. So is this secret technology super telescope or a toilet roll wrapped in foil? No one here can say they know. It's also worth pointing out, NASA is actually a military government agency. It's not a federal organization that just was independent and came into the federal government. It's a military government agency, and the Russia space program is also a military government agency of 1957. Okay, just going to go through the ISS, the International Space Station. They say this goes 17,000 miles an hour as well. Nobody knows how it got going that fast. There's no articles, footage. And I used to work in a lot of software systems, as I said earlier, and in the just $100,000 systems, we would do the wiring super nice, like in the top. And on the space station, you see this sort of crazy wires everywhere. I think it's to make them look super intelligent, but there's no way that would be allowed on a spacecraft where life and death is very much on the edge. This is interesting, jet fighters blacking out at 1,300 miles an hour. And this is an astronaut, Tim Peake. At this point of the launch, he was going 25,000 miles an hour. He's moving his head, thumbs up to the kids. That's not really possible. And I studied the space station a lot. I did a 10-part series on it, had hundreds of thousands of views, and they don't really do any experiments. None of you here could tell me a big experiment they did that progressed humanity on the space station. What they're doing is live link-ups to schools, showing themselves floating around. Here they got a pizza delivered, and they said it's the most expensive pizza delivery. Here they're dressing up as sportsmen. Here they're playing around with water next to all these laptops. You know, you just wouldn't be doing that. As I said, I did a 10-part series called the ESA Hoax, European Space Agency. One episode I like is when one astronaut was doing a live link up to a school, but the guy in the middle said, "Oh yeah, I watched the football game last night," which is just not possible. And because the bandwidth on the ISS is supposed to be only good enough for email, and then he puts his hand on his head, it was live, and they knew that they messed up. This was very interesting. And in this episode, I exposed that the official story says that they have a satellite 20,000 miles away that beams internet to the ISS. You know, for me, that's kind of garbage. Another episode I like, I think it's episode 2, where the Soyuz rocket is docking with the space station, which they say happens every couple of months. They're doing it, they run out. What stops working is the automatic docking. They're like, automatic docking is not working. We have to switch to manual. So they're doing manual docking at 17,000 miles an hour with manual engine burns, going around a curve, which is also spinning around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour. This is ludicrous. This is complete garbage. And if you watch the episode, you'll see a lot more data. But of course, I don't want to stay on space too long. Now, the ISS, we've all watched Hollywood films, very easy to green screen. But what we can see in the sky, through the best telescope in the world, you can see this in the sky. But it sort of pulses, it sort of moves a little bit. It's like it's expanding 10, 20%. It's sort of pulsing. That, for me, is not enough evidence to suggest there's a space station. It's just a thing in the sky. Also, this has been happening recently where the thing in the sky doesn't even match what they say is in the sky. We can also see they used to do live footage from the ISS because it does quite a few orbits a day, they say. And at the top of this image, you can see from an aeroplane 6 miles, and then the image from the ISS 220 miles. Something's not right. Something NASA have never shown us is a guy going into a dock, getting changed into a pressurized airlock, and then going out to space. They never showed this in one cut. They started doing this recently, but up until a few years ago, and I watched hours of spacewalks, the astronauts never turn around 360 degrees. It's always like two-dimensional. And in television, this is called the fourth wall. And this is a fact. It's a giant swimming pool at NASA, and where there's like an International Space Station in there, and they say this is for training. And they train the astronauts because they say it's similar to zero gravity. Okay, that's okay. But as we know with technology now, this is very easily used within film footage. And on many videos of other researchers, you can actually see bubbles coming out of the astronaut's helmet. But it's highly likely that these backpacks they use capture the bubbles. Another interesting thing about all these spacewalks I watched, and I watched probably 50 hours of this stuff, is they're going out to do a spacewalk to repatch an Ethernet cable, or change a battery, or change a transformer. Now, in all of our homes, the cables and the batteries, it's all inside. It seems quite a clever thing to do. On submarines, everything's inside. But for some reason, on the space station, they put everything on the outside.
Interesting.
Another interesting one, I did a whole episode about this. I found this rather funny. They had a floppy door on the space station. And of course, you go to an aeroplane, which is another pressurized container. You have a very thick sealing door. How is this astronaut able to float in space, yet keep pace with the Earth, which is going around the Sun 66,600 miles an hour? We'll get onto this a bit later. And of course, many of us here have seen the film Gravity, and you can see what sort of effects they can do with astronauts and outer space. These rockets, for me, are empty fireworks. If you actually watch the trajectory of their flight, they go up, along, and then they go down again. NASA launch pads for 20, 30 years was Cape Canaveral in Florida. And a lot of these ships, for my research, go into the Bermuda Triangle. That's why they don't want people going there. And with GPS, which is another military system, they send your GPS crazy, so a lot of boats don't want to go near this Bermuda Triangle. It's really a dumping ground for these fireworks. Just last week, they said civilians went to space with SpaceX, and again, the trajectory of this flight takeoff was very strange. And in the bottom left, this might be hard to see, they're doing a very strange hand signal. They're all hiding their thumbs. Okay, we go to Mars. This is the Mars rover. Again, a belief. They say they landed on Mars because of this image. Again, a belief. And I think just a year ago, they talked about this helicopter on 1 million miles away. Average temperature, minus 60 degrees, 14 minutes delay, while Mars travels around the sun at 50,000 miles an hour. And of course, Mars, they say, has no atmosphere, while less than 1% of Earth's. And they say they're flying a helicopter there. I'm going to stick my neck out there and say that's garbage. That's nonsense. They did the Red Bull skydive recently from outer space. And if you study the footage, you can see different logos. You can see discrepancies. The curvature is too big. That would be far too high up. That would probably be many more thousands of miles up than what they said. Also, he landed just a few miles away from where he took off. If the Earth's spinning 1,000 miles an hour, he would have landed a few hundred miles away. You know, this is an industrial concrete mixer. Looks pretty similar to me. So what's happening is pretty much the whole of humanity is seeing this and believing this guy's tagging along at 17,000 miles an hour. So we're very much in a realm of beliefs. And it's nice. We all like to believe things other people believe. It's a sense of belonging. It appeals to the subconscious. Who is this guy? Elon Musk put this car in space, I think a year ago. He actually said it's real because it looks so fake. He actually said that. The tires didn't burst, which is strange in a vacuum. Now, if you watch the footage on the last second, if you press pause and put it on slower motion, there's 0.2 of a second where it flashes to this, which is a studio, which in newspapers around the world, they showed this is where it was prepared. And for me, if you capture this last second, this split second, you'll see it was all just filmed in this studio. I mean, to believe this went to space, for me, I will stick my neck out and say this is garbage. Fake and ridiculous. And what they do, they use Jeff Bezos, the Amazon guy, also going to space. They use Richard Branson, also going to space. Elon Musk. These are all very likable entrepreneur archetypes. You speak to any man who's got a business, you speak to the crypto gangs, everyone likes these guys. You know, there's something to aspire to. So they get everyone to like these guys, and then they use them. I could speak about this sort of thing for a lot longer, but we've just got too much to get through. And this is the Amazon rocket that went up just a few weeks ago, Blue Horizon or something. Of course, this could easily be done in a studio. It's a belief. SpaceX messed up many times. Here, the flame of the rocket has a shadow, and of course, fire doesn't cast any shadows. And there was one they did with CGI, computer-generated cows running across the field, complete garbage. This is the Virgin rocket, and then the Amazon rocket. I mean, maybe they're mocking us a little bit. This is the Apollo flight route, and then on the bottom left, you've got the Mars rover route. I mean, I believe they're mocking us. What they did 2 years ago, government said they've created a space force, which is a military department that will focus in space, and they use the Star Trek logo. And they even made a Netflix series called Space Force with the very popular Steve Carell from The Office. And the logo was, "Space will never see us coming." And for me, this is how they mock us. Okay, so if a submarine pushes against water and a plane pushes against air, what does a spaceship push against? Because it's in a vacuum, zero air. This is a little bit weird. For me, if you're in a vacuum and you're pressing thrusters of fire, the vacuum will come in and suck the fuel out. I went to speak to some scientists about this, 2014, and they said they're using clever valves. And I said, "Can you show me them?" They said, no one knows where they are. So apparently they're using clever valves. For me, in a vacuum, if you press thrusters on an engine, you're just going to start spinning unless you're completely symmetrical. And this can be proven with a drone in a vacuum. If you get one of these cheap drones or even an expensive one, you try and fly a drone in a vacuum, it's just going to vibrate on the floor, and for no reason, it's just going to start banging against the walls. The idea that they're flying in a vacuum of space using burning thrusters, for me, is a bit of a wild story. So, they also say, with this vacuum of space, that it exists right next to the non-vacuum, the spinning atmosphere. Now, how does a vacuum exist next to a spinning atmosphere? If you think of your car tyre or your motorbike tyre, if you put a knife in it, it's going to equilibrate. I actually went to see some scientists about this, a very famous astrophysicist, and the official story is that gravity is pulling the air molecules down, but not all of them. So apparently gravity is working differently on different air molecules based on altitude. Okay, this is their story. That's okay. So in the middle image, we could say these are air molecules. Gravity's pulling them into the Earth, but some of them aren't getting pulled to the Earth. And actually, some of these air molecules are on the Moon, by Mars, by Venus. That's what mainstream science tells you. I asked her for some instrumentation that could prove that. She said no. So, to elude on that point, how does gravity know where the atmosphere ends, the spinning atmosphere ends, and where the vacuum begins? How can gravity hold one air molecule at the edge of the atmosphere against the power of the vacuum? Okay, so they say the atmosphere is a positive pressure, vacuum of space, negative pressure, no barrier needed. But with a submarine, it's a clear example that you need a barrier against different pressures. Same with an aeroplane. Moving on, we can see this at night. This is called, they call this the centre of the galaxy, the Milky Way. This is quite a new term from 1960s, and I studied the ancient myths about this, all around the world they called this the Dark Rift. I actually have a documentary about all the ancient myths about this. It was always called the Dark Rift. All around the world, the Aborigines, the Maya, everywhere you look. But only recently they called this the Milky Way, center of the galaxy. These are exoplanets you've probably heard of. So a few years ago they started saying that they found other Earths, other solar systems with Earth planets, with water and atmosphere. And this is probably the most famous one, the TRAPPIST-1 system. And when you search for the proof of this, all you've got is this. This is the actual image that they got to say 40 times 6 trillion miles away, there is Earth planets like this. Again, I went to see a famous astrophysicist about this. This is online. I said, this is a bit of a jump. She said, yeah, it's a bit of a jump. All they're doing is capturing light. They have instrumentation that captures different light in a dark part of the sky. This is kind of garbage. Okay, they also tell us it rains on different planets. Again, no instrumentation to prove this. It says it rains diamonds on Neptune. Don't tell my Russian girlfriend, please. She'll be stealing spaceships. Okay, they also say in mainstream science a teaspoon of a neutron star, which is a collapsed star, they say it weighs 1 billion tons. Again, that's pretty wild for me. For me, it's garbage. It's pseudoscience, never been proven. Okay, moving on to satellites. Now, when you look at images of satellites in space, all you get is these cartoons. This one is a famous one from the 60s or 70s where a satellite was near Jupiter, and they actually took this offline. You can't even find this anywhere now. So why did they take this offline? And who took the photo? So what, they had a satellite following the satellite. So this is kind of garbage. They knew it. They took it offline. So they say there's about 3,000 satellites orbiting the Earth. Some, I think the word's geostatic, where they stay stationary, and some are orbiting. Some around 200 miles away, some around 600 miles away, some even further. Now, at night, we've all seen these white lights in the sky going in a straight line. And we all say to each other, oh, that's a satellite. But how can the human eye see something 200-300 miles away, the size of a bus? The human eye can't do that. If you look at an airplane in the sky, just 7 miles away, we can only just about see it. So from my research, these are just high-altitude drones, technology since the 60s. But we'll get onto this in a bit. But the idea that these white lights in the sky are 300 miles away and that your eye can see them, that's a little bit crazy. In Europe, all of the satellite dishes don't really point up. Okay, not a big problem. But there is a problem when they're all pointing southeast to a giant mast in Luxembourg. And also ask yourself, why in the 1920s all of these skyscrapers were built in places like New York, and on top of all of these skyscrapers were these giant antennas. And in the sea there's these giant antennas. And if you study on how your phone works, if you get into some hardcore physics and science about how your phone works, there won't be any mention of satellites. It'll all be triangulation from masts. Also, and this is real information, mainstream, underwater cables supply us with the internet. Underwater cables all around the world supplying us with the internet. Now, if there's these 3,000 satellites, why are we doing all these underwater cables? And a lot of these were funded by Google. I knew one person who was on this project. He said they had to sign something saying they weren't really supposed to talk about it. So this wasn't really put on the news, but it's not really hidden that much. It's quite easy to find this. And interesting to know, we all know this, GPS and 4G works well in cities and towns. It doesn't work well when you go remote into the ocean, deserts and mountains. On boats you can get internet, but you've got to pay a lot and you've got quite low bandwidth. I went to a scientist and asked, how does a satellite actually get into orbit? Surely the vacuum of space would make it float away, or gravity would make it fall back to Earth. And he said they're using clever computers to get a clever trajectory. Now, surely if that trajectory was 0.1 of a degree up or down, that would mess it up. As someone pointed out to me earlier today, they say satellites are all actually falling back to Earth. None of us have seen a satellite falling back to Earth or heard about it falling on one's house. This was an interesting thing many years ago. NASA cut their live feed from the ISS, and on this particular occasion, they cut out the Earth but forgot to cut out the satellite. And this was covered by a popular channel at the time called Globebusters. Many errors you can find. I could speak for hours about these errors. Now, Arthur C. Clarke was a high-level Freemason. I don't want to go into that today, really, but he's the first guy to come up with the idea of satellites in a magazine in 1945. He also co-wrote the book Space Odyssey 2001 with Stanley Kubrick in 1968. Now, nearly all of the ideas in Space Odyssey 2001 are used to be real now. So a lot of the ideas in this book, which is a book of fiction, are used now as real. Satellites from space, for me, high-altitude drones, high-altitude balloons. For me, these astronauts working on satellites are really working on these antennas. European Space Agency, I actually phoned them up. I knew one of these satellites was very, very fake. Okay, European Space Agency, I phoned them up once and I wanted to speak to some engineers about this satellite I knew was fake. And they said, there's just media and PR department here, who do you want to speak to? So I phoned another office, just media and public relations, and I phoned all the offices in Europe, 8 or 9 offices, it's all online, and there's no one there. It's just public relations and media. There's just no one there. NASA in Hebrew, Steve will like this one. NASA in Hebrew means to deceive. Very interesting that they chose that word. And this is interesting. If you add up the budget of all the Star Wars films, we're looking at around 1.5 billion. This isn't just like, oh, let's make a movie and entertain the kids. This is $1.5 billion of budget to make movies about space. You can also look at the big budget for films about Jurassic Park and dinosaurs, but I'm not going to go there today. So for me, and this is crunched down to what, 20, 25 minutes, I could do this for hours. The only thing NASA sent to space was your imagination. And space is really Santa Claus for adults. None of you have actually been there. You're all working on beliefs, images, repetition. Next jigsaw piece. Okay, Antarctica. So, they say, again, these are images of Antarctica from space, from outer space. For me, I don't know. From what I know, I would say it's not enough for me to go on. I would say you're getting high on CGI. Probably say something like that. On the crack pipe. And with Antarctica, it's interesting to see that you can't fly across it. You'd think, well, surely you can fly over Antarctica. It's a short route, Africa to Australia, South America to New Zealand. You can't fly across it. And they say because it's too cold to fly over. But you can fly over Siberia, you can fly over Sweden, Canada, but you're not allowed to fly over Antarctica. I mean, they get into flight routes a lot later, but this is going to make more sense later on, but we've got to build it up slowly. Now, interesting to know is they say we can't fly over Antarctica because it's cold, but they can fly to Pluto, 2.5 billion to 4.5 billion miles away, where it's minus 300 degrees. And if they can do that, flying over Antarctica should be easy. Also interesting to ask yourself is why has no one ever circumnavigated the globe, like flown around the globe north to south? It's always east to west. Why has nobody ever done that? Interesting, in 1954, I think, there was the Antarctica Treaty was formed. All these countries got together, signed up to the Antarctica Treaty. A lot of countries you think are enemies, on the news these countries are made to look like enemies, they all signed up to this treaty. And apparently it was all about protecting Antarctica to protect the penguins and the whales. And these are the countries that initially signed up. Now, to go to the Antarctica as possible, you have to go through the official tourist group, which are a part of the treaty, and it costs $20,000 just to go and see some penguins and take a selfie, or it costs $60,000 to go to this red pole in the ground where your GPS phone says 00, you're at the South Pole. And let's remind us again, GPS is a military system first used in Vietnam and used a lot in the Gulf War. So again, we're working on belief. If you spend your $60,000, go to some snow, it's pretty cold, you see a red pole, they say you're at the South Pole, you don't know for sure you're at the South Pole. You're working on beliefs. This I have online as well. There's a thing called the Antarctica Boat Race. They say these yachts do a 14,000-mile race. I mean, it's a bit wild. I mean, maybe sail to Lombok and back, have a little race. But sailing around Antarctica is a little bit wild. And I phoned up the webmaster of this website, because I know it's garbage. And I said, what's going on? What do you know about this race? And he said, nothing. And he hung up on me. Phoned him again, didn't answer. And that's all online. I can send you the links of those phone calls. Now, when you do some research and find out who is the creator of this race, you find this artist called Robert Williams, and he paints art like this. Very interesting. So I actually phoned up the Antarctica Treaty, the Antarctica Tourist Board, and I said to them that I was rich many years ago. I certainly wasn't. And I said I had a group of guides, group of boats, and we're going to Antarctica from Hawaii and India. And you can see this is far away from their group tourist area, which is Chile and New Zealand and Australia. And they went crazy. They were emailing me, who are you? Where's your permit? You're not allowed to do this. And I said, don't worry, guys, I'm going to Antarctica on my own. I don't need you guys to help me. I've got all the gear. You know, I was lying. I didn't want to go there. It's too cold. And the point here is that they went crazy. They sent me all these emails asking for permits, who I was, what do you want to do there? This place is locked down. You can't go to Antarctica. It's one of the most guarded places on Earth. I would also say the North Pole is very guarded as well. Here's another slide. You could look at the top two, Operation High Jump and Operation Deep Freeze, declassified CIA projects where they were doing things in Antarctica. We don't have time for that today. You can do that in your own time. North Pole again, this photo makes you believe, but there's no evidence that's the North Pole. They do a North Pole marathon, they say. For me, this is a photo shoot. It's garbage. I don't know anyone who wants to run around 24, 26 miles in the freezing cold. Doesn't sound like fun. So these places are heavily guarded. If you want to go to the North Pole, I actually looked into it. I tried to get funding in 2015. You've got to get a military helicopter from Norway. It's very hard to get. They drop you off. They can't drop you off exactly at the North Pole. It's all very hard to get there. Okay, next jigsaw piece. Earth spin. Okay, we're doing pretty well on time. Okay, they say the Earth has 4 motions. It spins on itself, 1,000 miles an hour, spins around the Sun spins through the galaxy, 483,000 miles an hour, and the galaxy floats through the universe, 1.3 million miles an hour. 4 motions of Earth. Now, we don't feel them, and we'll get onto that in a minute, but it's quite interesting that we pretty much see the same stars every night. I would expect to see the stars with that sort of motions, with those 4 motions, to do some parallax, where some are moving in a different direction to others further away. Or something like this when you're going fast in snow. Or even something like this. These 4 motions are pretty wild, and I would expect the stars to look pretty crazy. And this takes quite a lot of thought. It's a bit like mental yoga. It's very hard to get in 2 minutes. Now, so these 4 motions of Earth. But they say we don't feel these 4 motions at all due to constant velocity. So they say because the Earth is spinning 1,000 miles an hour, constantly, we don't feel the spin. Constant speed, constant velocity. That's how they get away with it. But interesting, when you study rotational physics, at a very high level, we're talking master's, PhD, rotational physics. If you look at the fairground ride at the bottom, you can think of this as the Earth and the humans on the edge, spinning 1,000 miles an hour, okay, constant, but we're going around the sun as well. That creates a different speed. That means these humans on this fairground ride will be going slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast. I put this to one of the world's most leading astrophysicists, not online, I was sitting with her, and she said, I don't know the answer to that. When your car shifts in acceleration, you feel it. When you go at the same speed, you don't. The Earth is not going at the same speed. It has a change in velocity and a change in speed. They also say the Earth orbit is elliptical. Now, we're not going to get too technical, we're just going a bit deeper here a little bit. So surely this would mean another speed change. What they say, mainstream science, is there's no speed change of 66,600 miles an hour around the sun. The shape change is due to gravity from planets, and the different distance has no effect on weather. So if you go to Japan, just a few thousand miles away, it's going to be a lot colder. But this 3 million miles discrepancy away from the sun, no difference in temperature. That makes no sense at all. They say they proved that Earth spins in 1851 with the Foucault pendulum, which is more of like a ceremony. They got the world's media there, and they put it into all the newspapers around the world. All they did, they showed that a pendulum is never at rest. And that's okay. Things in this reality are never at rest. That doesn't mean, that's not enough evidence to say the Earth's spinning. But at this time, everyone in the world was very much into newspapers, especially richer people, academics, people writing books. They were very much into newspapers. And they put this into the newspapers everywhere around the world. The Earth spins. It was proven in Paris. Interesting to know that just a few years before, the Associated Press created a new technology for wiring news around the world pretty quickly. It was like a jump in the printing press. Interesting for me is when you fire a ball at 50 miles an hour out of a cannon from a truck going at 50 miles an hour, the ball stops dead. This means for me there's no momentum. I asked the astrophysicist, how do you prove spin? She said, well, the sky's spinning. Well, because the sky's spinning, it means we're spinning. I said, well, maybe that means the sky's spinning. And she just insulted me. She just said, well, you're crazy. Okay, here's another interesting one. On both solstices, we're looking at completely different directions in the sky. That's about 150 million miles difference. And we see the same stars in the sky, looking in a completely different direction. So if you think of looking towards the sun daytime, looking out to the sky at night, you see the stars in the sky. The other side of the sun, looking in the opposite direction, you see many of the same stars in the sky. And that's a problem. Now what NASA does is sort of gets away with it by pushing it all so far away. It says Polaris, which is the North Star, which is the one in the middle of this wheel on time-lapse photography. It says it has a diameter of 44 million miles and is 2,604 trillion miles away. And when you look for instrumentation that measures that, there's just none. There's none around. It's just in the astrophysics books, it's in the science books. There's no actual mathematical evidence. Of course, I can see trillions of miles away, bro. Another interesting one is shooting stars. We've all seen what we call shooting stars in the sky. A lot of them are quite synchronistic, really. We're having a beautiful evening, we go out, look into the sky, and a shooting star comes, sometimes at a poignant moment. And interesting is that no human being has ever seen a shooting star come up below the horizon. If we were on a spinning ball, we should see shooting stars in every single direction. I'm going to show a little video clip now. This is of Norway. There we go. And this is the summer solstice, where they have 24 hours of light. This is around 50 miles away from the North Pole, and we can see the sun just goes all the way around. How do we know that's the Earth spinning, or whether that's the sun moving? Spinning ball in a vacuum. Got any evidence, bro? Next jigsaw piece, gravity. Okay, if you go to Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, you'll see that gravity is a theory. No one's really worked it out. No one's really got to the bottom of it. They sort of said, yeah, gravity is why things fall down and why there's a solar system. It explains many, many things in this sort of cosmology that we're taught as a child. So what we have here is a ball with water spinning, and obviously water flies off. And what they say is because of gravity, it does the opposite. Okay? And this gets a bit interesting when we see that gravity is so strong that it can hold water to a spinning ball in, say, Australia, which is upside down from the observer in, say, England. And not only that, it can hold a boat upside down with all its cargo, with cars and equipment. But then, if gravity is that strong, how can we just blow a dandelion and the feathers fall off? And what your subconscious usually says is, well, it's because it's less mass. But then, if you have a baby, your baby doesn't float around because it's less mass. So there's some pretty weird errors with this theory of gravity. You know, if gravity was that strong to hold that boat, you wouldn't be standing up. Strong enough to hold the oceans, weak enough that birds can still fly. So the universe began with hydrogen and helium gas attracted by gravity, they say. Here we have hydrogen and helium not attracted by gravity. Turned on for the oceans, with these very heavy clouds, gravity doesn't pull them down. This takes a lot more thought than just a few minutes, but these are just some slides to get you thinking. So this is what we sort of believe. On the equator, on the globe, ships are like this. And what they did in 1797, they did what's called the Cavendish experiment. This guy put two balls in a shed, and they span around, and he said this proves gravity. And this is easily debunked. I mean, this is how many years ago? This is a long time ago. This guy was playing around with string and balls. This is the main evidence of gravity. It's a complete load of garbage. I could do an hour on this. We just don't have time. So, assumptions of the gravity theory. Forms spheres in the vacuum of space, creates black holes. The graviton is responsible for the force, attracts everything to everything else, bends invisible and undetectable field called space-time, bends light over hundreds of trillions of miles, attracts everything to a center of mass. But the only observable evidence is things fall down, which can be explained by density and buoyancy. Density and buoyancy. So we don't really know about all these things, about these planets spinning around. This is images. We've never been there. So we're going on belief again. But what we do know is density and buoyancy are real. If I drop something, it will fall down because it's heavier than the air molecules. Submarines, buoyancy, density. Neil deGrasse Tyson, famous astrophysicist, sort of celebrity astrophysicist, they asked him, what is gravity? He said, I don't know. Okay, next jigsaw piece, the sun and moon. And we're going to revisit the sun and moon in another couple of layers later. So they say that Earth is super small compared to the sun, yet we have these rays coming into the Earth called crepuscular rays. Now, I would have thought the light would hit us like this, all at once, because we're so small. But they say this sort of effect is due to refraction. Now, refraction is real. Light does bend in water. It bends in different atmospheric conditions. But this is a whole lot of refraction. That's like wild refraction. So we're going from that to that. That's a whole lot of refraction. And again, we're working on beliefs that the sun is 93 million miles away. They actually changed the distance of the sun about 10 times. First they said it was a few thousand, then a few million. They made it shorter, longer, but now they've agreed it's 93 million miles away without any instrumentation. This is the analemma. This is a little bit complex, so we won't go deep into this. If you take a photo of the sun every day, you'll get a path like this, like a figure of 8. Really, this should be a even, symmetrical figure of 8. They know this, and what they did in the early 1980s, they took the analemma off the globes. If you go and buy a globe somewhere online or in a shop, you will not find this analemma on the globes anymore, because they know it's a problem. And I will show you the solution later. This is an image of the sun, they say, with all these solar flares and burning. And of course, fire requires oxygen, and of course there's no oxygen in the vacuum. Now for me, this image is garbage. These images come from the SDO satellite and the SOHO satellite, a website called SolarHam. This is pumped out on a few YouTube channels of some very questionable people. And for me, this is all cartoons. These are images. If you look at the image on the left, this is a real photo of the sun. I used to work with people with the best telescopes on Earth when I was my work got quite popular. And this is a real image of the sun on the left. And this is a fake image. They're using these fake satellites, SDO and SOHO. These are live online. You can see their footage. They have these big, wonderful flares and fires coming out of them. This is all garbage. But they use solar flares. They need solar flares because that's how they explain the northern lights away. And we'll get onto that later on. So, moon again. Let's go on to the moon. Who turned the lights out? Whenever we see these astronauts on the moon doesn't look very bright. And when they went to the moon, these are all the missions, it was generally full or waxing. So they say the moon reflects sunlight. At the top, we see a rock reflecting sunlight, and the moon sort of glowing. That's not reflecting sunlight for me. This is very interesting. The top image is sunlight. It casts a shadow, and the shade is colder than the sunlight. Now, they say the moon's reflecting sunlight, so it should act the same. But what's happening is, in the moonlight, it's actually colder than the moon shade. And you can test this yourself. Many people, 2015, 16, were testing this themselves. It was all taken off YouTube a few years ago. So if it's reflecting sunlight, it's got to act like sunlight, but it acts the opposite. At the top, we see a rock illuminated by sunlight. Now, I believe, and I've written a book about this, the moon is self-illuminating. People say, oh, that's really crazy. But then you believe the sun's self-illuminating. So it's okay that the sun's self-illuminating, and for some reason, it's not okay that the moon self-illuminates. A sphere in the sky, if it's reflecting light, it would have a hot spot. This is what a sphere looks like, reflecting light. It has a hot spot. For me, there's no evidence the moon is a sphere, and it very much looks like it's self-illuminating. Now, the moon has one face, and everyone on Earth sees the same face. This is a bit of an issue too, because if the Earth's a globe, people in, say, South America and up in Canada will be seeing different parts of this sphere, and will be seeing slightly different faces of the moon, even though it's 6 times smaller. You'll be seeing an extra 4 or 5%, but everyone sees the same face. And we'll explain this away later. This is an official NASA image. They did a video image of the dark side of the moon. For me, this was complete garbage. It looked like a cartoon. Not enough for me to go on. Another interesting one on a solar eclipse. The sun and moon match up perfectly, but we're told, and we actually, many of us believe, there's 93 million miles between them, and it's just coincidence that they appear as the same size. They say the sun is 400 times bigger, 400 times further away. Just coincidence. Okay, next jigsaw piece, probably the most fun one, is Earth's curvature. So they say, all over the internet, Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, if you stand at the ocean and you're 6 foot tall and your toes are touching the ocean on a calm day, you can see 3 miles, and then the curvature means the sea's away from you. Okay, 3 miles is what they say, standing at the ocean, because of the curvature. So, this may look complex, but we're going to explain it simply. This is agreed in encyclopedias, mainstream science, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford. You can do your own research. You will find this Earth trigonometry, spherical trigonometry. So basically, all we care about is these green columns. Now, I'm going to do this in miles, and I apologize if you're more in kilometers. You can work on the right side of the screen if you're more in kilometers. So if you walk 1 mile in a flat line, apparently they say there's 8 inches of curvature, which is about this much for 1 mile. If you walk 10 miles in a straight line, not going up or down, they say there is 66 feet of curvature. Very easy to detect. With kilometers, let's do this in kilometers. For 5 kilometers, they say there's 2 meters of curvature. For 10 kilometers, there's nearly 8 meters of curvature. Very easy to detect nowadays with the technology we have. So me and a few friends went out, and some friends went out with a laser, and you can get these $1,000 lasers, and found a 20-kilometer lake, and the laser bounced off a mirror. So one guy was one side of the lake, one guy was the other side holding a mirror, fired the laser, and of course he should have been like 5-6 meters above, and it hit the mirror. Lighthouses. There's a book in the 1920s called The Book of Lighthouses for boatsmen, ship people, and it had the distance you can see a lighthouse. So people on their boats knew whether they were near England, near France, where they were. And it had the distance to all the lighthouses and when you could see them. So this lighthouse in southern England is only 180 foot tall, and it's visible from 42 miles. This is a curvature of 996 feet. You shouldn't be able to see it. This is Chicago's skyline on a very clear day when the atmospheric conditions are right and the temperature's right. You can see Chicago's skyline from nearly 50 miles away, Indiana. And what they did, this is quite a famous thing in these circles, is on the news that day, because it was going viral all around Facebook, oh my God, we could see Chicago. And he said it was a mirage. He said it wasn't actually there. Chicago was refracting around the curve of the Earth. A submarine's periscope, very useful, but of course, if the Earth's curving the way they said it is, and the periscope only goes 2-3 meters above the ocean, you would only see a few miles. You wouldn't see these ships. Yeah, a 10 miles target would be 66 feet below the curve. Periscopes would be useless. We have images like this with a lot of mathematics. Dubai, for me, it's another place like New York where they built all these skyscrapers to put antenna upon them, satellites. Again, we don't see much of a 3-mile curve. Of course, we're much higher up, so the horizon's a lot further. Tokyo, Egypt. And these images aren't proof of anything. I'm just giving you some conceptual images. At what scale does sea level become a curved surface for this ship to disappear behind? Now, I'm going to show you a few video clips. It's worth knowing that this mainstream cosmology is based on Galileo telescopes that are made of wood. They're quite crude, and they only did about 20 times zoom. And about 2015, the Nikon P900 came out, 84 times zoom. And I think 2019, the Nikon P1000 came out, 125 times zoom, 4K. So let's have a look at some of these videos this camera has collected. Okay, bear with me. So here's the ship. This is using the P900. There it goes over the curvature. There's another boat, and it looks like it's going over the curvature. Of course, it's not. It's just going outside the vanishing point of the camera. There we can see a boat. So we'll just pause that here. So basically, people at the beach would say, well, you can't see the boat because it's gone below the curvature. You get that camera and you bring the boat back. So what you're doing, you're going further into the vanishing point, which we're going to get into. Here's another interesting one. Here are some oil rigs. I think this is America somewhere. And he's going to measure on Google Maps. You can measure the distance to places. I think there's an oil rig 6 miles away. And there's another one 9 miles away, I think. And of course, from the seashore, you shouldn't be able to see these. They should be below the curvature. This guy zooms in. Very easy to see. Bit of a problem. Bit of an issue. And one more. This is Toronto. Using these super zoom cameras. Yeah, obviously that hasn't gone below the Earth's curvature. Got the imaginary curvature caused by mythical gravity much, bro. I don't know how that got in here. You see someone smiling. So when you study the horizon, it's actually more optical and not physical. It's more to do with the human eye. The horizon does do some strange things. You can study things like angular resolution. You would have thought there the boat at the top right should be below the curvature. The horizon does do strange things. I'm not denying that. And you have these mirages. Very rare, but you can get an inferior mirage and a superior mirage. So if you're doing your own tests, you have to know a little bit about these things. Then these people started to put up these amateur rockets. All of this is taken off YouTube now. Amateur rockets, amateur balloons. And it was just looking like this sort of blue haze at the horizon. And of course, these people weren't using GoPro lenses, which does a lot of fisheye. This is quite crude. Obviously, the perspective there is not 93 million miles, but the sun looks like it creates a hotspot. And of course, the horizon is not looking like it's curving. Most of these videos were at 100,000 feet, 110,000 feet, but yet we still believe this. How does that become that? The people in Thailand are standing sideways, got any imaginary concepts that never existed. Much, bro. I don't mind if people in Thailand are sideways, but it's got to be provable. So what they have is they say, okay, it's 3 miles from the viewer, and then something goes over the curvature, but then surely the sides will curve as well. So what they say is Earth's too big to see the curve, but ships go over the curve. You can't really have it both ways. But they keep doing this. Oh, you can't see the curve from an airplane because the Earth's too big. But then they say ships go over the curve. But we've just proved that ships don't go over the curve because we can bring them back. So to expect curvature on the y-axis, which is a little bit faint, when there is no curvature on the x-axis, is absurdity times pseudo-lunacy squared. It doesn't make sense. Now, this image has been used a lot to sort of shut people like me up. Oh, what about this? And what this is just perspective. Like if you lay down on some grass and a friend walks away from you, they'll disappear on certain atmospheric conditions. But it doesn't mean they're going over a curvature. And also you can take a photo of these power lines from another angle and you'll just see this line of perspective. So if you guys go online, you're going to find this image. And we can start to see that NASA are faking this curve. It's a NASA image. That lake is too big. They're using fisheye lenses. Here, another official image from NASA. Italy's too big. Concorde, which they decommissioned for other reasons. That's another hour conversation I could have with you about jet fuel, how jet fuel fits on the Concorde. And I'll stop myself. but the curve here is too big. This Hurricane Harvey from the space station, the curve's too big. It's like half the size of America. What I implore you guys to do, if this is a bit weird for you, is go down to Salaban Beach in Uluwatu, get hold of a P900 camera, and look towards Java, because the nearest point in Java is 53 kilometers away. And me and my friend used to do this in Salaban Beach, and the stone surfers used to walk up the steps, and we'd pull them in and show them that you could see Java, and they would get a bit spun out about it. Yeah, from Uluwatu, you can see Java, and with this camera, you can zoom right into the shore and the boats. You shouldn't be able to see it. Now, at this national park in Java, there are some hills and mountains 200-300 meters high, but most of them should be below the curve. You shouldn't be able to see the boats at the shore or some landmass near the shore, and I can assure you, you can. Another interesting one. On every airplane in the world, pretty much, there is something called a gyroscope. This is a mechanical device, nothing to do with electrics, purely mechanical, and it shows your orientation to the horizon. So, and this horizon always appears flat. I spoke to this flight instructor. I phoned her up. This is online. She got super angry with me. And I said, okay, you teach people to fly? She said, yes. I said, use a gyroscope? She says, yes. I said, well, surely you dip the nose down every few miles to hug the curvature of the Earth. And she said, no, we don't. They just fly in a straight line, and the gyroscope stays horizontal. And I said, you never dip the nose down for curvature? She said, no. And she started getting angry at me, calling me crazy. Now, really, planes should, on a giant ball, have to dip the nose down, or they would find themselves at 80,000 feet in just half an hour. Now, the Blackbird goes 2,000 miles an hour. We talked about the Blackbird earlier in relation to the shuttle. That's 500 miles of curvature each hour, or 700 feet of curvature per minute. The Blackbird should be dipping its nose down. So just ask yourself, how do these airplanes fly around this globe when they're not dipping their nose down? Well, one person said because of gravity. But that's just a bit of a word, it's just a word. It doesn't prove to me that they're hugging a ball. Can you fly this plane and continually nose dip to account for the bendy oceans? Yeah. We also have Russian radar systems that go 300 miles, supposedly around the ball, but radars don't really work that way. The railgun, this was about $100 billion of research, the railgun. A big development, research and development in the American military. This can hit a target 100 miles away in a straight line. That's around nearly 7,000 feet of missing curvature. Another interesting one, no matter how high you are, the horizon always rises to your eye level. Whether you're standing at the sea, up a mountain, on an aeroplane, weather balloon, the horizon always rises to eye level. For me, if we're on a ball, think of like a fly on a ball just jumping up a millimeter, the horizon would go down a little bit. Now, all of this, some of you probably sitting here thinking, oh, well, you're not an astrophysicist. Who are you to say all this? Well, I actually got hold of one of the world's leading astrophysicists, Dr. Bitchute. She's got a practice in Germany, in Freiburg, and she does a lot of TED Talks about astrophysics and exoplanets, and I pretended I was someone else, fake name, fake website, and it took me a few months, but I got a 1-hour interview with her. And I went very slow with her, and I sort of boosted her ego a bit, and then I slowly started raising these questions to her and showed her examples of the lack of curvature and no evidence of the Earth spinning, and she lost it. She started acting like a little girl, she got flustered, she got annoyed with me, and I had to say to her a few times, calm down, you're the scientist, I'm just asking you questions. And she just started saying, you're not a scientist, you're not a scientist. But we're all scientists, we've all got our senses, and we're all taking in data. At the end, she told me to stop recording, and it was like on a movie, I clicked upload, and it was uploading while she was chasing me around the room This went viral online pretty quick. It's worth a listen. She got completely smashed. She hasn't got answers for the questions I have. 2 days later, after it was uploaded, I got stopped near Munich by a black Mercedes, people with guns. And it wasn't long after this where my YouTube channel was taken offline. I just woke up one day and it just wasn't there. But this went quite viral, and it's on a lot of decentralized platforms. And yeah, it's been translated into a few different languages. But this chat with an astrophysicist, because a lot of people said to me for years, if you're not an astrophysicist, who are you? You're sitting around doing meditation, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, I'm going to go and find an astrophysicist. And if you listen to that, you'll see how it goes. They're just repeating nonsense. They're just in a series of beliefs. Next jigsaw piece, water. Water always finds its level. Water always finds its level. Now, at the top, that's observable, repeatable, measurable. Water finds its level. And what we're supposed to believe, what most of us have believed most of our lives, is due to gravity, this image at the bottom. But it's never been observed, repeated, or measured. We've had no proof of that. Water takes the shape of the container, and the surface always seeks a horizontal equilibrium. That's provable. The Nile flows for 4,000 miles north. So they're saying that it flows up around the bend. The Nile flows up around a bend it is supposed to be sticking to. This is a bit of mental yoga. We haven't got time to go through each slide for an hour because we could. But it makes no sense. So which one of these three makes more sense? Because what we're led to believe is the top one. And if we believe the top one, if you're in America looking towards Hawaii, say you're at San Francisco looking towards Hawaii, you believe that water goes up 8 miles and then down 8 miles. And that water just does that because of gravity. And that's a belief. What we can actually see and witness and measure is the bottom one. Now, when water curves, like some of you surfers might know, the sun reflection curves with it. So when we do tests with light, mimicking the sun on a curved surface, the light doesn't go to the feet, it doesn't go across the ocean. But on a flat surface, the sunlight goes across the surface. Well, we can see that again here. And there's me in Alawatu, having a nice time. You can see it again there. So what's going on with the sun? This was a tricky one for me, because maybe there's no curvature, but we all see the sunset. I'm going to show you a little clip. Now, if you put your eye at the level of a table and move the sun across, it looks like it's setting. Also, at a sunset, there we go, the sun's just set. And if we go up, the sun reappears and sets again. Here's another one. If we zoom in on the sun reappears. Just like the boat. Very strange. The sun doesn't look around 93 million miles to me. It looks pretty local. And of course, this footage is only a few years old from these new super cameras. The sun doesn't look like it's outside the atmosphere. There seems to be clouds behind it. Very interesting. Okay. I just came to see the bendy water, where the water is clinging to the bend but not flowing. I don't know how this slide got in there. This is a professional talk. Okay, another jigsaw piece. Technical. I just want to skim this. Okay, in the lunar eclipse, they say the moon is in the Earth's shadow, and that's why it disappears for a few seconds, and then it flashes red. They say it flashes red because the sunlight is refracting around the Earth, and that refraction through the Earth atmosphere paints it red. Never proven, bit of a wild story that this yellow goes to red, maybe, maybe not. The solar eclipse, a bit loud there, the solar eclipse has a small viewing area of about 100 miles wide. This is pretty much every solar eclipse that's ever happened in the world, always about 100 miles wide. And that's a bit weird, because the moon has a 6,700 mile circumference. So what they're saying is the moon is casting a shadow smaller than itself, but shadows are always bigger than the object casting it. That image shows it a little bit better. They're saying that the moon shrinks its shadow to a pinpoint, a 100-mile point on Earth. That makes no sense. They're saying this is happening. A shadow is always the same size or bigger than the object casting it. And you can test that for yourself with your hand under a light. You can test it with a torch. You can test it any way you want. The shadow is always smaller than the object casting it. Also interesting with the solar eclipse, this is where the moon and sun are together, is these strange viewing angles of it. Like in 1970, a very strange viewing area for this solar eclipse. Makes no sense at all on their model. Now, with these 2,000 satellites, how many of these satellites have actually caught footage of these eclipses? None. But then 2 years ago, they did have one, and all they did was this. And this looks like the footage earlier, where the Earth disappears and the ISS just stays there. That's garbage. So I'm just going to conclude this section before we move into part 2. To shut people like me up, all they have to do is zoom in from the ISS to an upside-down boat. That should be easy for them to do with a P900 camera. Never been done. All they do is call people like me crazy and give insults and take us off of YouTube, take us off the internet. Why haven't they zoomed in to an upside-down aircraft? Why has that never been done? Another one is they could take off from the North Pole and keep filming it, and then you'll start to see the Earth spin. Why have they never done that? Very easy for them to do if this model is true. So what they do, they sort of say it's too big to see the stars in parallax, too big to prove motion, too big. They just say for everything it's too big, or gravity, or refraction. So when we really look at these proofs of a globe, we're really looking at NASA images. It's photoshopped, but it has to be. We're looking at, we could call it indoctrination. We know because the experts told us, the scientists told us, and popular opinion. Everyone else believes it, so it must be true. They say Nicholas Copernicus proved it. Did he, though? And we can look at Kepler, Copernicus, and Galileo, and they were all Jesuit priests. They were not scientists. Yeah, they were sort of mystics. They were interested in the sky, and they liked telescopes, and they liked to write, but they were mainly Jesuit priests. It's likely this was an agenda. And then in recent years, we've got people like Bill Nye, very big in America, Bill Nye. He was known as Bill Nye, the science guy for all the children there. We've got Brian Cox in the UK, Neil deGrasse Tyson. These are your modern day scientists. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is a failed actor and Brian Cox is a failed musician. And they've got the fun personality, the housewife's favourite. You know, they're very charismatic. But you try and get an interview with these guys, impossible. You can't get near them. Pure fiction. This guy I could talk about for an hour, but I think I'm just going to say, when you're funny, you can't do stand-up comedy. I mean, the only thing I'll say about this guy, he had that robotic voice. Now, if he was that smart, surely in the year 2000, he would have changed his voice to something more human. But they kept the voice robotic because it was talismanic. We all recognized it. Oh, there's that clever astrophysicist. There are documentaries about this guy, all taken offline. For me, he was very anti-system and very smart, and they got to him. The disease he had, I think it was ADS, ALS or something. He should have died in 2 years, but he had it for years. We tried to get an interview with him 2016 because he apparently works at Cambridge University. You can't get near him. He's an archetype. So what they're doing is, people like this guy and the rest of this sort of globe Earth world, it's like equations. It's too clever for you to understand. So what we do growing up, we think, oh, well, the experts understand that. We push our power away from us. We say, oh, the clever scientists have worked that out. But when we look into it, there's a lot of errors. And of course, children are fed this daily. Magazines, Time magazine, talking about the Great Reset, something I've been working on a lot the past year, debunking this, where they're sort of building the globe. And this is interesting as well. Universal Pictures, in that sort of Hollywood gang, they had a picture of the globe in 1927. How did they know in 1927? BBC, I think most of us here pretty much know the BBC aren't to be trusted. They love a globe. They've always loved a globe. So with this big globe magic, there's a spin but you can't feel it. There's curvature but you can't see it. There's space but you can't go to it. And there's a force but you can't measure it. So this list of globe Earth proofs was never even proven, bro. But are they actual globe Earth proofs? Or did you just recite them from a Rothschild sci-fi book? Lend me some of that blind faith so I can go back to believing the Earth is a spinning globe in the vacuum of space. So this is all kind of like theoretical science. It doesn't really need much proof because it's become a religion. Just have faith and believe. And it's kind of cult-like. If you study what a cult is, it's an intense interest or devotion to an idea. Like if I go to a dinner party and start talking about the Earth might not be a spinning ball, people freak out. And, with the word cult is quite interesting. There's a lot of 666 in there. Earth revolves around the sun, 66.6 thousand miles an hour. Curvature of 1 square mile is 0.666 feet. The Earth's axis, the tilt, they say, is 23.4 degrees. 90 take away 23.4, 666 again. So with this globe Earth, what I did, I tried to prove it's real, and I found with using observable, measurable, repeatable, scalable science, there's just no proof. And I'd like you all to just internally just ask yourself, what is your number one proof of living on a spinning ball Earth in a vacuum? Because we should all have, I know 1, 2, 3, really clearly. And sometimes we look at ourselves and go, well, I don't really have one. It's sort of like a modern day IQ test. 478 years of trusting the science didn't get us very far, did it? So like if this is your proof of a globe, I'll say this is my proof of a unicorn. So it's basically doing the same thing. And if you can't question it, it's not science, it's propaganda. People like me who ended up with these big YouTube channels, our stuff all got removed. There was a video made about me by someone saying I was a satanic government agent. They tried to make me look very stupid. It isn't hard, actually. So what I do at this point, I just put the globe in the bin. Fantasy globe ball, load of garbage. And in the next section, we're going to look at what are we going to replace this with? What is rational to possibly replace this with? So we're sort of saying we sort of debunked that spinning ball, especially from the world of facts. So what am I saying? I'm saying here I'm a direct realist. I say the Earth is motionless and water finds its level. I no longer personally believe I live on a spinning ball orbiting the sun 93 million miles away. I don't believe this as there's no actual evidence. So these images on the left I deem as real, and these images on the right I deem as garbage, military government propaganda. I deem the horizon as a line of convergence. The bridge isn't going down and the sea isn't going up. It's a line of convergence to do with the eye. Lines of convergence. So depth perception and lines of convergence work like this. Everything below the eye goes up. Everything above the eye goes down. And the same with left and right. It's the human eye's vanishing point, nothing to do with the Earth's curve. It's a local sun that comes and goes. A local sun that comes and goes. Again, a local sun that comes and goes. And on a clear day, with the right atmospheric conditions, the sun goes to like a pinpoint, a very tiny dot. This is quite rare to see, maybe once a year, twice a year. If you watch sunrise or sunset every day, with the right conditions, you'll see the sun shrink and shrink to a dot because it's going away from you. The sun's setting is not evidence for the Earth's rotation. It's evidence of the law of perspective. In Phuket in Thailand, if you look west on a sunset, you can actually see the sun move slightly to the right. I actually have a small video clip of this, a few seconds. Provable, measurable, repeatable. The sun appears local. There's no evidence it's outside the atmosphere. So the globe Earth model, top left, doesn't really make much sense with this gigantic sun and its sun rays, especially when we look at divergent sun rays. Divergent sun rays are when we get different rays of the sun coming through different clouds. Now, I'm not saying the sun is where those rays are heading. I do believe in refraction. I know refraction's real, but something doesn't fit with the model they're telling us. With this knowledge that the sun is local, this debunks the climate change story of the sun putting a hole in the ozone layer. I just want to digress for 2 minutes here. The idea of an ozone layer for me is garbage. It's just cartoons and articles from governments. I did a talk with a big climate protest group, Undercover Again. This was in Freiburg, Germany. And the leaders of Fridays for Future, they were getting lots of families scared and protesting. Yeah. I hit them with some facts, not really about the Globe Earth model, just about this climate change CO2 narrative. They got very upset and walked out the interview. This is all online. This was taken off YouTube 4 times. I kept changing the title. It's now on Bitchute. And these guys were young. They were just like 18-year-olds looking to create a movement, to belong. They didn't know anything about anything. So with all these puzzle pieces we've looked at so far, where might we possibly be living? So it's highly possible we could be living somewhere like this. No curvature, and the ice is around us. The South Pole is around us. Something like this. I'm not claiming to know, I'm claiming to see what's left. And this matches the Gleason's map in 1892, very famous map. From this model, it's highly likely the sun and moon go around above us, around 100 miles wide each, about 1,500 to 4,000 miles away. It's hard to get the distance because with trigonometry you need 2 of the 3 measurements, and here we don't really have any of them. But doing some sun tests, so I had people in Europe and America, we can see where the sun sets in Europe and where it rises in America, and we can start following the sun, and we can start to make some pretty good, half-accurate guesses on how far away the sun and moon could be. But this is highly probable. I've yet to have anyone say this is nonsense and prove a good enough reason why. Highly likely the sun just goes around 24 hours, 1 revolution. But then you might think, how does this give the seasons? But I want to talk about this first. There's a term going around the world and around the internet where people talk about flat Earth. But this is like a loaded term. It brings up things in the subconscious. It brings up ridicule. If you type this term into the internet, you're going to get a load of nonsense. And that's by design. And I could do an hour talk on why and how that's by design, because I've seen how the YouTube algorithms have changed over the years. I prefer to stick to the term geocentric. Geocentric means the sky is moving around us, the sun is moving around us, whereas they have us believing in an heliocentric model where we go around the sun. I've even got to a point now where I don't even care about the term flat Earth or geocentric. I don't really care if I say the word flat Earth. It doesn't bother me. So we can call it flat Earth, we can call it oranges, but it's definitely a place where there has no curvature, where there's no detectable curvature, and we've tried to measure it with decent technology. So another image, something like this seems plausible. Now, how do you get the seasons, you might say? Well, the sun will spiral into the Tropic of Cancer slowly. So in December, it's in the Tropic of Cancer. Sorry, in June, it's in the Tropic of Cancer, making the northern hemisphere hotter, summer. It's interesting because the summer solstice is in the sign of Cancer. And then conversely, in December, the sun travels to the Tropic of Capricorn. So it slowly spirals out over 6 months and slowly spirals in. When it crosses the equator, that's the 2 equinoxes. Again, another way of showing that in quite a crude way. This is how the seasons work, and it makes a lot of sense, and it's very hard to debunk. Again, timeanddate.com, which is at the top. I've had this verified by a lot of people. Timeanddate.com shows sunlight hours all around the world and where the sun is. This is correct, but it also works on this model that I'm leaning towards more. At the bottom 3 are on this model. Light is light, and light does its thing on the globe or on this flatter model. Time zones make more sense on this model. Circumnavigating the globe. Yeah, well, you can circumnavigate the world like this too. People say, but you'd fall off the edge. Well, it's very easy to evident these giant ice walls in the south. I think there was one Swedish sailor who sailed there a few years ago, and they just put him in jail for a year. He just got a bit lost, and they were like, what are you doing here? Put him in jail. Giant ice walls. Water has a container. And of course, if you go to Antarctica to go and see some penguins and get a selfie and put it online, this is really what you're doing. You're just going to one of these tourist groups that are owned by the Antarctica Treaty. You're paying $20,000, and then you're just zooming over to the ice, getting cold, and then bragging about it to your friends. So there could be other land. There are many people who believe there could be other land like this. Maybe there's other land. We don't know. Maybe lots of other land. We don't know. This is a newspaper cutting from Hawaiian Gazette, 1907. And they had a whole page about the Earth looked like this, and this is more of the map. One thing's for sure, in Antarctica, there is definitely a lot of money spent on these sort of scientific areas for observation. No one really knows what they're doing. I think a few years ago, I think a lot of the world's leaders, quote unquote, they all met there for some reason. Very strange. So, electromagnetics. So the north comes out of the north. Whether we call north and south oranges or bananas, it doesn't matter. What we do know is compasses face the center. Compasses face north. So we could call that the center, or we could call it the north. Electromagnetics definitely come out of the north and then point south. That's what we know. That's observable. Now at the north, we do know that there is this sort of northern light, or Aurora Borealis. I don't know if I remember the word. Aurora Borealis. Thank you, Greg. And they explain this away by saying it's due to solar flares, those images we saw earlier. I don't know if any of you have witnessed this phenomena. It's a very beautiful, blissful sort of state. It's very almost like a divine energy that comes across you with these green lights coming through the forest. This is probably to do with the electromagnetic generation. There's something happening at the north that is generating electromagnetics, and we're not allowed to go there. And they explain this away with solar flares. The idea this is at the south, officially they say this is at the south, and it's called, Greg, in the south?
No idea.
Yeah, Australis Borealis. I have not seen enough evidence of this being real. It's highly likely to be a hoax. So if we go back to the map, where would that happen? So it definitely happens at the north. I've seen it myself. At the south, I've yet to see evidence. So it's highly likely an electromagnetic generation happening at the north, which leads us to images like this, which leads us to like the idea of a torus field. Also, this was just sent to me recently. If you look on the American Army website, there is a document called Propagation of Electromagnetic Fields over Flat Earth. This is a PDF you can download. You can actually find this. Type this into Google. You can actually find this deep in the Army website. They've got a whole document about electromagnetics over Flat Earth. Interesting. Electromagnetics are never taught at schools. They just talk about electricity and gravity and Bunsen burners and things that aren't useful at all. And of course, we all know about Nikola Tesla, and he was working with electromagnetics, and how JP Morgan and the banking families brought him down and stole that technology. You know, this is also an electromagnetic power bank generator. Maybe the Earth, something like this. Here I'm just playing. Here I'm theorizing. Maybe something like this. Maybe something like this. Artist impressions to get you thinking. And maybe the north is really just like a giant magnet, electromagnetic portal. You could call electromagnetics chi or prana. The label you give them isn't really important. Now, I want to go back to flight routes. We talked about this earlier. The International Space Station has a rather strange flight route on the globe. It goes up and down, up and down. But on this model I'm looking at, this geocentric model, it's a perfect circle. Makes a lot more sense. If you fly from South Africa to Australia, remember you're not allowed to go over Antarctica. But surely on the globe, you would just go, okay, say it is too cold in Antarctica, and we give them that. Surely you would just fly directly from South Africa to Australia, but you always go up to Dubai or India, somewhere like this. And on the model we're looking at on the right, it makes a lot more sense. Again, we see it there. South Africa to Australia. Doesn't make sense on the globe why you would go that far up north. Again, same image. You can look at lots of flight routes. I could talk about the flight routes for an hour, but it's just too much to do. This is Cuba to Moscow, bit of a strange arc, but on this model we're looking at, it makes more sense. This is kind of a low-res crude image. This was all taken offline. The flight routes make a lot more sense on this map we're looking at. And with this map, we don't really know where Australia is. It's sort of just an interpretation. I'm not saying that I know. I'm just saying this all makes a lot more sense. Something like this. I've had this said to me a few times. Well, if it's sort of, there's no curvature mark, why can't I see China or Mount Everest with a decent telescope? Well, we can't see through buildings, hills, mountains, waves, dense weather, atmospheric distortions, pollution, or the most obvious one, vanishing points, lines of convergence. As we saw earlier, even these 100 times zoom cameras have a line of convergence. Interesting to know is Cable and Wireless have a map from 1951. Very interesting. The UN had a map 1950. This is very hard to find online now. The UN flag today and the World Hoax Organization both have this map. Very interesting. Loads of films had flat Earth maps in. It's just a couple here. Mars Attack, Back to the Future, the opening scene. This woman works for Google, and in America they do these sort of Congress hearings. They do them for crypto. They do them for a lot of things. And they said to her, what are you going to do with disinformation? And she actually said, I think this is on Odysee, it's not on YouTube anymore. She actually said, if we see any videos of flat Earth, we're going to remove them. Meanwhile, the Earth is still not spinning or curving. Very interesting. They actually blatantly said, we're going to take them offline. But what you do now, if you type in, I know this silly term, flat Earth or geocentric Earth, you're going to find images like this and images like this. And of course, you're going to think it's a big load of nonsense. This is what you find. And you find all this complete nonsense with ridicule. No one can prove the curve, no one can prove the spin. But if you type in flat Earth to YouTube, the top 100 videos are all pro-globe, and there's nothing left from the decent work in sort of 2014, 15, 16. Air currents, ocean currents, temperatures, jet streams all make sense, maybe more sense on this map we're looking at. Radar makes more sense. Sundials make a lot more sense. Compasses make a lot of sense. The idea that a compass is going around the curve. Astrolabe, bottom left. Sextant, bottom right. These are very complex devices for navigations for ships. Many centuries ago, the astrolabe and the sextant were designed for a flat Earth and still work on the flat Earth. They don't really work for a ball. These four instruments alone you can study in your own time, and they're going to give you a lot of mental yoga, and they're going to help what we're trying to say here. This is a temple in Karnak, India. They call it the Temple of the Sun. This wheel, super intricate, these tiny spokes, I think I've got a mouse, yeah. These tiny spokes each measure sunlight shade to such accuracy, it's incredible. And this doesn't really work on a globe. There's about 12 other of these spokes on this temple. One they think is for the moon. They don't know what the other ones are for. But this is some incredible temple measuring celestial objects. No one's really worked it out. But things like this don't really work on the globe. So there's all kind of evidence of this flat Earth. What more do you need? You need to hear it on television. But all the world's governments would have to be in on it. How's worldwide lockdown working for you? So it's kind of like, so far we sort of cracked this globe, we've got this sort of different model. I'm not saying it's 100% true, but I'm just playing with imagination and playing with theories to get us to where we sort of have an idea of what it could be. The next jigsaw piece is the ancients. What were the ancients saying? Well, you can go all around the world. I've got a Germanic one in there for Ludwig at the bottom. And they all say the same thing. We're on a flat plane and the sun and moon go around us. Celtic, Roman, Japanese, Buddhism, Inca, Babylonian, Egyptian. And just look at those images. And these are very ancient and these are all around the world and they all said the same thing. It's Nordic on the right, which I think also links into German, Maya, Cusco, Peruvian, Inca, all said the same thing. And what, we're going to put all this in the bin because an American military agency said something different. Celtic cosmology, Egyptian cosmology, this is the goddess Nuit, represents the stars in the sky. This is Zoroastrianism, it's where modern day Iraq is. Mesopotamian.
Somebody needs to bring it up, sir.
And then we can look at Greek, where a lot of mysticism was, a lot of mystery schools in Greek. They said the same thing as well. And we can get into Christianity, and this gets quite interesting. I'm not a Christian, but I look at many things. The head of NASA, Vernon von Braun, he was the head of NASA for about 30 years, I think. On his gravestone, he put Psalms 19.1, and this says, "The heavens tell out the glory of God, the vault of heaven reveals his handiwork." Or you could say the firmament of heaven reveals his handiwork. The word in Hebrew, rajia, could mean firmament or vault. So on his gravestone, it seems like he was trying to seek redemption for all his lies with NASA. So on his gravestone, he put Psalms. God put his glory on the sky that is close to us. In the Bible, there's nothing about spinning globes at all. It says he has fixed the earth firm. Fix the earth. The earth is not to be shaken. Yeah, it says it's still, immovable. There are many other Bible verses about this flat cosmology with the sun and moon spinning around. And this is very biblical. We can put this into an image, a bit more interesting. They talk about water above and water below, which will get interesting when we look at stars soon. This is biblical again, different way of looking at it. Again, biblical. In Genesis, it says God made two great lights, great light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, which is the moon. He made the stars also, and God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth. Interesting. This is biblical again, a bit more artistry. Kettle's weird. Again, biblical. This is Enochian. The Book of Enoch wasn't allowed in Christian canon. It's not recognized as true Christianity. It's a very mystical book, very beautiful actually. And this has a lot of words about our cosmology. It talks about a flat plane and these gates in and out to the east and west. It's quite cryptic, but again, no talk of spinning globes. Now, in this biblical Christian world, there's no talk of other land. Islamic cosmology, very similar to biblical, so they talk about the seven heavens. In the Vedas, many doctrines, many documents are in the Vedas. One I studied a lot is called the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's sort of high Krishna philosophy, you could say. Makes the Bhagavad Gita look like a book for children, really. Srimad Bhagavatam is really sort of tough Krishna, high consciousness philosophy. And in the 5th canto, it talks just about our cosmology. It talks about this giant flat plane of millions of miles, and we're one piece of land of many. And it also says there's sort of hell worlds below, which we can sort of say is lower vibrational realities below, and above are much more heavenly worlds, higher vibrational. And this plane we're on is a physical plane where we can feel pain, and we can actually experience liberation here. We're like in the middle. We're like in this neutral plane where light and dark can balance out. Again, a top-down view of the Vedic cosmology. They sort of say we're one of these lands at the bottom. Vedic cosmology again, many millions of miles across this flat plane. They talk of this giant mountain in the middle called Mount Meru, and they say we're on Bharata Varsha, which is down the bottom. All these lands of Africa, America are sort of around here. They talk of these giant mountains, like thousands of miles high. So to get to the mountain in the middle is like 500,000 miles or something insane. Again, in the Vedas, there's one story where Vishnu turns into a rhinoceros to lift the flat earth up, to lift the vibration up away from the demons. So the earth gets quite demonic. A lot of demons are here, and Vishnu turns into this giant rhinoceros and he lifts the earth up in vibration. So he doesn't really kill the demons, he just lifts this flat earth up. And this map sent me a bit crazy, 2016. This is a map of Jainism, which also comes from Vedic doctrine, as does Buddhism. And I couldn't understand this sort of map of our cosmology. And I was in Rajasthan and I went to this Jain temple in the middle of nowhere. And I met this guy and he was the priest there. Someone's going to kill that dog. Is there any Chinese people here who can eat it? And I met this guy, and he was a descendant of this really high Jain priest, and he looks after this giant temple, and he was so excited to meet me. When I said, look, what does this map mean? He was used to dealing with tourists, and he was like super buzzed, and I went to his secret chambers, and we did these meditations. And he explained it to me that Bharata Varsha's at the bottom, and all the people in the West have been mind-controlled by NASA. And he showed me these giant stone tablets of these flat worlds. And I hung out with him for 2 days. And he was a highly evolved being, This guy was flying. And this is Buddhist cosmology, Jambuvipa. They say Earth is here in the south. And again, a giant mountain in the middle, Mount Meru, similar to Vedic, Hindu, what fell into Hindu, yoga. Another Buddhist cosmology map, Jambuvipa again showing this flat plane with this mountain in the middle. Tibetan shows this flat world here in the middle with human beings, dark worlds below, higher worlds above. think this is Chinese or Japanese Buddhism, same again. Tibetan Buddhism creation story, how the winds and the elements sweep across the flat plane and create manifestation. Now, I've made a documentary in India called Waykiwayki, Cosmology Advanced, and I went to the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, and I was like, I want to have a chat with you, I want to film it. And he was like, no, but you can speak to my number 2. And this is his translator, and he looks after the big library in Dharamsala. And just after 5 minutes, had the video set up, I was recording it, talking about Jambu Vipa, Buddhist cosmology, and then he said, stop recording, stop recording. He wasn't happy. It was like he was protecting something. So I hid my phone under the table and pressed record, and the whole conversation's online. And what he says is, he says the Dalai Lama told all the Buddhists that their cosmology is a load of rubbish because NASA proved them wrong. And that's what he said to me. He said, it's all rubbish. We've told all the Buddhists, it's all nonsense. And I got a book from the university nearby about Buddhist cosmology saying it's flat, and I was supposed to give it back, and I didn't, because I thought it was better in my care than their care. Yeah, interesting video, have a look if you want. Lots of images of a flat plane. There's Ezekiel's wheels, where he's going up the heavens, up the spheres. Ezekiel's a very Kabbalistic document in the Bible. There's another picture, this is a Kabbalistic doctrine of the flat earth. Christian esoteric art. Steiner, most people know him for the schools, but actually Steiner was a mystic and a philosopher. He alluded to us living on a flat plane. He didn't say in so much words, but he pretty much said the globe's a load of rubbish. Here's an image, a map from 1752. These maps I'll show you are very hard to find now. I don't know the year of this one, but it shows other land at the south. Terra de Fuego, which is the land of fire. You see all these other lands around, very interesting. These are maps of the north. I think these are 1600s. So at the north, there are many maps where they talk about the Bargo Islands, these 4 islands at the north. This is 1531. 1633, 4 islands at the north. 1534, another map, 4 islands at the north. And one video I made, if you email me, I could probably send you the video. You go to Google Maps, or Google Earth actually, and you go to the north, and you zoom in like quite close, and you just scan around. And I did this for hours, so I'm a bit crazy like that. And you can see they've painted in the snow. There's 1 pixel where there's land, and they've painted in the snow above it, but they've missed a bit. It's very interesting. Other maps of the north. Maps of the north, 1570. Islands there. Also at the north, there's this mythical place called Hyperborea, and this is big in Greek mythology and also Russian mythology. I think till recently in Russia, a lot of children were taught about this magical place in the north, with these giants and flying machines. There's also other books. The Smoky God is the one that rings to mind. A Norwegian fisherman, he said he went through a mountain and ended up with these magical utopian place for a year with these giants. So there's a lot of myths about this magical place in the north. I'm not saying they're true, but it's just good to know they're out there. Next jigsaw piece, the sky. It's going to get a little bit technical again. We're going to try and keep it light. This is the sun. This I've had taken by people with really good technology. We don't know what it is. It's a thing. We don't know if it's hot. We don't really know how far away it is. We don't know if it's electromagnetic in nature, pranic in nature. We have no idea what it is. It's a thing in the sky that gives warmth and life. It's probably beyond our comprehension, beyond our consciousness. As the Vedas says, to understand our cosmology from within the cosmology is very difficult. Sunspots are real. Definitely have evidence for sunspots. It's highly likely when we have solar minimum, which is a few sunspots, we have a colder Earth. And when we have a lot of sunspots, solar maximum, we have a hotter Earth. So for me, the whole climate change gig is to do with sun cycles and they want you to believe it's from your car and your hairspray. We're actually coming into solar minimum in a few years' time. So if the north and south get cold, you'll probably know it's from sunspots. Now the analemma we looked at earlier, and we were asking why is it not a pure figure of 8? Why is it not a symmetrical figure of 8? Well, on this model where the sun spirals round, hitting the Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, it's doing a bigger spiral when in the southern hemisphere. This is why they took the analemma off of the globes you can buy in shops. This is a little bit tricky to work out yourself, but the analemma is a big key for this model. Again, another image showing how that analemma creates a small spiral and then a big one. Okay, onto the sky a bit more. They say this is Earth photos from Saturn. Yeah, well, that's a belief. This is actually Saturn taken through the best telescopes in the world. That's all it is. A thing, a white light in the sky that gives us energy. This they say is Jupiter. This is the NASA version of Jupiter. And the NASA version of Jupiter's moon, one of its 6-7 moons. And this is the reality. There's no actual evidence Jupiter's a sphere. It's just a light in the sky that gives us energy. There's no evidence these are moons. They are just lights that hang out with Jupiter. So here's actual images of Saturn, Mars, Neptune, and Venus. Mars really just flickers in the sky. It's like a red light, and it flickers in the sky. If we study Venus deeply, it does these amazing, well, all the planets in the sky do these amazing geometries, but Venus is easier to detect and follow. It's known as the dance of Venus. It creates a perfect pentagram due to its retrograde cycles, cyclic retrograde cycles. This is all shown in one of my documentaries. The idea this is random from rocks hitting each other is complete insanity. So at the top we see the NASA stars, and below we see what are real stars. If we zoom in on them, we see this sort of pulsing, beautiful geometry. So this is the sun, and these are stars. They want us to believe that all these stars are suns. There's no evidence. These stars, when you zoom in with this new technology, very beautiful fractal geometry. It's impossible to give them words or a description. One of the stars looks like a donut, and it's actually spinning. Very beautiful. You may think these are different stars, but it's the same one. They sort of pulse every 10th of a second, as they sort of change their shape very quickly. So a friend of mine in Copenhagen had some very good technology. He was a pilot and started talking about flat Earth on social media, and they took away his flight license, so he wasn't allowed to fly anymore. And he then got bored, so he bought all this technology and was capturing a lot of amazing star footage. You know, many Christians in this sort of research field believe the stars are in water because of the Genesis model says the sky is in water. And with this star sort of flickering, yeah, it looks a little bit like a swimming pool, we could say. Again, it's a theory. One thing's interesting is if we collapse an underwater bubble with a sound wave, light is produced. No one really knows why. This is known as sonoluminescence. You can check this out online. It's a real phenomena. You can see the whole procedure. And maybe the stars are resonance, divine resonance, high resonance in water. Hard to know. So in the north and south, let's pick, say, England and South Africa, because they're on the same timeline. We see things in the sky rotated. And this makes sense on this model because it would be something like this. I mean, of course, it still makes sense on the globe, but the globe, I sort of feel we debunked earlier. Polaris is always at the north, okay, due to the little wobble, not of the Earth, but the sky. The sky does a little wobble, 1 degree every 72 years, giving us the precession of the equinox, the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius. Polaris is pretty much always at the North Star. When we move around the Earth as a human, we can't see all of the sky's stars. We can only see a few of them due to vanishing point of the human eye. So it's sort of something like this. This small black dome is what we can see in the sky. we can only see about 20% of the sky with the human eye. Something like this. It's a bit crude. Now, the stars in the sky could actually be flat. It might not be a dome, like the Christians believe. It might be the human eye and perspective making them appear as a dome. I'm in an unknown state on this. This is quite hard to see, but in the map on the right, you can see someone moving down from Spain to Africa, moving down a couple of thousand miles, and the sky moves because your vanishing point moves. And there's software called Stellarium, and you can move around Stellarium because all star planetariums are all flat. You get a bunch of people on a flat place and a dome sky. And this is how the software Stellarium works. You can have a good move around the hours, move around the Earth. I've spent hours in here many years ago. So again, motionless Earth makes sense. The sky's spinning. Heliocentric model, which would be something like this, crazy looking stars. On the equator, things get a bit interesting because you have another spiral in the south. This will get too technical for today, but just know that the wheel in the sky in the south, if you use time-lapse photography, it paints this sort of fractal. Gravity. So we can see this beautiful fractal in the sky with time-lapse photography. The idea that all those stars are in a random position, a bit weird. Bit of a fractal in the sky there. I actually studied the sky deeply, all the motions, without thinking about the globe. What are the motions and the speeds? And I made a documentary called Cosmology Advanced, the Luminaries Mysterium, because I called the lights in the sky the luminaries. This got to 500,000 people or so. They took it off YouTube. They hid me from YouTube. This was before they took my channel down. But this has been re-uploaded to decentralized platforms by many people, put into quite a few languages. This is a very factual and sort of mystical look at the sky. There are a lot of things we don't know, but I sort of say revel in the mystery. It's quite nice for us to not know things, whereas in today's world, men especially are going around saying they know what the sun is, they know where we come from, and for me it's kind of an illness. This reality's got a lot of wonder, and there's a lot of things we don't know, and that's very beautiful. So like the Vedic cosmology, they say the sky is a type of clockwork, and it's almost true, you know, the sun tells us what time it is, the moon tells you what day it is, and the stars tell you what month it is. It's like a perfectly designed timepiece. I'm going to show you a conceptual art video that elaborates on this theory. It's only a couple of minutes, I think. It's just a piece of art showing that all these movements in the sky kind of act like a timepiece, like a clockwork. Of course, this is quite a crude image because the sun should be catching up with the moon because it travels a little faster. The moon is 25 hours a day revolution, the sun is 24 hours a day, hence why the sun catches up with it once every 28 days in a new moon. With Polaris in the middle, the North Star. And the sun and moon, they don't really act like they're spherical. It's hard to know what they are really. And as an astrologer, we know that the sky never does the same thing twice. It's always doing something different every day with its combination of aspects and geometry. And this creates like a different clockwork. And there we can sort of see the seasons a little bit. Okay, it's just to give you a visual idea of this clockwork. And as an astrologer, I've studied astrology for 16 years, professional for maybe 7 years, quite a few hundred clients. This model makes a lot more sense. I'm getting much more accurate readings. Every astrology chart ever done is on a flat Earth. They have a flat piece of paper, a flat chart, and it shows all the planets moving around the Earth. This is how your astrology chart looks. It's a diagrammatic depiction. And all these globe-believing astrologers, on YouTube and these professional ones, they're using a flat Earth map to do their globe astrology. Now, I don't want to go too deep into astrology, but astrology changes a little bit with this model, because in the bull model, they have these lies that Jupiter and Saturn are very big, and there's no reason to believe they're very big. So we shouldn't be getting these aspects or geometry for Jupiter and Saturn when most astrologers say they're there. So I'm getting much more acute, much more accurate, simple astrology, and people really like it. Let's go back to eclipses. It's a little bit technical, but the sun goes around the Earth, and the moon takes pretty much the same route as the sun, called the ecliptic. What the moon does, it crosses this ecliptic twice a month. These are known as the moon nodes. When the moon is level with the sun, not level, when it's at the same point in the revolution, so on the left, the moon is where the sun is, pretty much. It could be 5 degrees up or down. This is new moon. When the moon is opposite the sun, that's when we get full moon. It's an electromagnetic geometric relationship. And this is what gives us the phases. The quarters are when when the moon is 90 degrees from the sun. Now, the moon is usually above or below the path of the sun. 2, 3, 4 times a year, it is level, and that's what gives us the eclipses. This is the lunar eclipse, where the moon is opposite the sun. This happens every full moon, but usually the moon is below the sun or above the sun. But if the node is at the same height at the same time, the moon is level. This is when we get the lunar eclipse. For me, it's an electromagnetic handshake because they're at the same height. This is what creates that red pulsing of the moon. It's like the moon refreshes itself. It disappears, comes back, turns red, and then reappears. It's quite a magical, strange phenomenon. And this works on this model very well. Let's look at the solar eclipse, when the sun and moon are together. Again, usually they're at different heights. The moon will be 5% below or above, 2, 3, 4 times a year. It's at the same height. That's when we get the solar eclipse. And we know what it looks like. It's like the sun is covered by the moon. And this is exactly where the moon should be. This is where the moon is. I'm an astrologer, I can tell you, this is where the moon is. But something very strange happens. Let's talk about this first in a minute. The solar eclipse path on the globe is a little bit strange, as we said earlier. But on this model we're looking at, it's a perfect circle. It makes a lot more sense. The shade makes a lot more sense. Also, the 100 miles width of this solar eclipse makes a lot more sense. So, the moon passes the sun. And I was studying this, something really strange happened. The moon just wasn't there. The moon just wasn't there. The moon was passing the sun. That's where the moon should be. That's where the moon is. But it wasn't there. It was like the sun was just eating itself. And this was like crazy when I found this out. And this is Photoshop playing with the levels. And if we go to Vedic documents, they talk about Ketu. It's a Vedic archetype that eats the sun at the eclipse. Now, it's highly likely, and I know how crazy it sounds, that the sun actually eats itself at the solar eclipse and refreshes. It's quite a bizarre phenomenon. But that is where the moon should be. That's where the moon is, but it's just not there. Okay, let's move on. Galaxies, for me, all garbage. All NASA CGI. If you zoom in with a telescope to parts of the black sky and you go deeper and deeper using zoom, you can find little bits of, it looks like cloud, sort of grey mist. This is what they're calling galaxies. These are all cartoons from the Hubble telescope, which is, for me, a toilet roll wrapped in foil. Shooting stars. The official story is that these are meteorites burning up in the atmosphere. If this was true, about 2 or 3 meteorites would get in every week, and you'd see a house demolished or a building demolished, or another meteorite hit something. No one in this room has actually seen a meteorite hit the ground. For me, this is all garbage, and the shooting stars that we call shooting stars are just wisps of energy. Oftentimes they're synchronistic. They're just wisps of energy, wisps of light, and we don't know anything more. Now, they say this is the biggest meteorite in the world, but there's no evidence that this fell from the sky. Another interesting thing about meteorites, the little bits they found around the Earth and they've got in museums and kids' museums all contain the same amount of cobalt and nickel. Surely if we were flying through space and these meteorites were hitting us, they would all be slightly different, but they all contain the same amount of nickel and cobalt, metals. We also say, an old image of me, that these giant craters in the world are caused by meteorites. I went to this one in Arizona, and there's no evidence of any meteorite. They say it burned up, it just evaporated on impact. They say it blew up, which is complete nonsense. And they had a museum there for children, very much cartoons. Come on, kids, come and learn about space. It was just a mind control center next to a giant crater. Now, what are these craters? I don't know. Maybe they're sinkholes. A lot of Christians believe that they might be geysers, hydrocraters, where waters come up during cyclic floods. I'm open to anything. I don't buy into these theories or not buy into them, but I'm happy people are thinking differently. Okay, how do we conclude this? So people say to me, oh, you must prove your claim the Earth is flat. And I sort of say, well, that's not really a claim. A claim sounds more like this. Earth spins, Earth curves. These are claims that I believe are easily debunked from what I showed you earlier on. Saying it's flat is kind of like how we experience it. None of us experience curve. None of us experience spin. So they're actually claims. I mean, nobody wakes up and decides to start claiming the Earth is flat and endures endless ridicule for the hell of it. It's rather an unavoidable conclusion after thoroughly examining the evidence. It's not really about the shape. The shape doesn't really matter. It's more about the lie. But why would they lie? Maybe they're hiding other land. Theft of money. NASA gets $25 billion a year, and the European Space Agency gets $7 billion a year. And of course, there's India, China, and all the other space agencies getting billions in tax. They're highly possibly hiding intelligent design, divinity, a creator. If you tell a bunch of kids at schools they come from random space monkeys, rocks banging into each other, they're sort of pushing atheism in school. They're very much hiding where we are, and they're hiding electromagnetics. Maybe we could get free energy quite easily from electromagnetics. Also, with the stars possibly being all for us, all around us, they're sort of hiding that our life is special and not random. And with their globe model, they're keeping the lies of the Big Bang and monkey Darwinism alive. You can also look at who's actually doing this then. Who are these people lying? If you follow this trail, you can find all these declassified projects, easily pick up this information. And you can look at the Jesuits, the Masons, the CIA, the Crown, based in England. And these sort of gangs are very much involved, Mossad. But what difference does it make? And really, what difference does it make? We've still got to brush our teeth and cook the food. We've still got to do our daily stuff. But it shows the biggest deception from authority that wants to lie to keep you controlled and feeling insignificant. Via a universe out of reach, the sky's out of reach, millions of Earths, you're just one of millions, and that you're sort of a random space monkey. So it definitely makes a difference. And also, one big lie allows many more lies. I can tell you for sure, all the people I know who are in this sort of flat model world, no one's got corona, no one's wearing masks, and no one's abiding by any of these rules. Because once you work out these sort of controllers lie to you about these big things, you just know they're lying about pretty much everything else. You ever see a dinosaur turn into oil and monkeys, then into a person? You tell us dinosaurs turn into chickens. And I can debunk dinosaurs in 1 hour. Another load of garbage to push history millions of miles away from you, like the way they push the sky millions of miles away from you. I also did a documentary about geology. This was a 3-year project, and I dug up an old scientist's work that got hidden, and he proved that coal doesn't take millions of years to form. It can form in a few years, like 20 years. The layers of strata at the Grand Canyon, these can be formed in about 30 years. The whole of mainstream geology is a bunch of garbage as well. A lot of these they call rock cut temples. They say they chiseled these out of rock. These temples were there before, and they were covered with lava. These statues of Buddha in China were actually around before Buddha. So something very strange is going on with history. You can see the Arc de Triomphe. This was built without power tools at the age of horse and cart.
And Moscow as well. Age of horse and cart, no power tools. Dresden. So if we're in the wrong place and the wrong historical timeline, consciously or subconsciously, we're in amnesia. Easier to control and kept very far from our full potential. If you're going to ask yourself one thing from this whole presentation, do you believe government scriptures? Because most of these, if not all of them, are sending you the wrong way. Now, we don't really know where we are. We do know we live in a divine reality, a reality that responds to our internal state in a flowing path of growth.
To know where one is helps to know who one is, where one came from, and where one is going. The individual absorbs knowledge, but truth absorbs the individual.